Civil judicial norm of non-aggression. Necessarily corresponding to property rights is the obligation to never initiate or to never employ first use of coercion against another's person or property. We call such initiation of coercion aggression. The only legitimate use of coercion against another's person or property is in proportional response to prior aggression. Legitimate coercion is exclusively responsive. Aggression against another's person or property, whether murder, rape, assault, theft, kidnapping, fraud, or the credible threatening of these things, is never legitimate. This norm concerning the legitimate use of responsive coercion and the illegitimacy of initiatory, or often called the non-aggression principle, is a God-given moral norm insofar as it is expressed in the biblical prohibition of murder and theft. It is also a God-given norm for civil justice expressed in the biblical affirmation of the law of proportionate retribution, as self-ownership / property rights delineate that which is properly coercively enforceable. All right. So how do you understand? Because this is where I think, not that there's anything wrong with the statement, not that you need to add to it, but I think this is where even if this was like the official constitution of society, there would be a real problem trying to clearly define what is credibly, what is a credible threat, like what is credibly threatening. So what is that to you?
Well, that's true, but that's why dispute resolution exists or should exist. Because there are hard cases, or because not everything is obvious, or there isn't always agreement. The particulars in the matter have to be weighed, and when people can't come to agreement, the peaceful way to resolve them is through third-party adjudication. So that's what it's all about. Not to answer that so easily in that way and just saying, well, it depends. There are certain criteria that have been established in jurisprudence for determining what legally would constitute the credibility of a threat. I forget what they all are, but in any case, the means to carry it out. So if the person's 10 feet away and their arms are shorter than 10 feet and they're, immobilized or something, a threat to punch me, they don't have the means to carry it out, at least not at 10 feet away. So things like that. And the issue is the use of coercion. What first, is it legitimate? And then are there any other constraints on it? Like, let's say because he's now credibly threatening me, do I get to stab him in the kidneys, or
Right. What is the
shoot
what
him in
is
the head
the
with a bazooka?
right?
What's a proportional response?
Right.
So the main, as we begin in this section about the civil justicial norm of non-aggression, the first distinction is between two kinds of coercion. So let me go through the four things it covers
Sure.
in this section. The first thing is that this norm, this civil justicial norm of non-aggression, is a corresponding obligation to rights. So if someone has a right, there's always a corresponding obligation on the part of others to give them what is due in terms of that right. So if I have a right in myself and my property, the corresponding obligation of others, in this case, is to never initiate, never employ first use of coercion against another's person or property. That initiation we reserve the word in this technical sense, aggression, to refer to.
Right.
So aggression shouldn't be confused with any kind of coercion. There's initiatory coercion, which is aggression, we're saying. Then we specify the only legitimate use of coercion, and that's in proportional response to prior aggression. And then those examples are given, including
Right.
credible threat.
So after the fact, so some guy has walked on to your property. We'll call him Doug. So Doug's walked on to Greg's property. Doug says, "Greg, I want to punch you." Puts his hands up, starts walking towards you, the super ticked off look on his face. And you're not a sucker, and so you're not going to wait for him to throw the first punch. He's already made his intentions very clear. And so there's a dust up. I'm not going to say who wins and loses here, but something goes down, a physical altercation occurs. Who then decides in, the RAR and the ref and Republic, who decides whether or not a credible threat occurred in order for you to initiate, ethically initiate force? Who decides that?
Well, if it's just him and me, then the matter of credible threat might be disputed. But if it's not settled between him and me, then, it could be that he approaches me with a credible threat and I, throw a responsive first punch,
Right.
knock him out. And when he comes to, he's like, "Yep, you got me. I'm sorry. That was my fault. I was out of line. It was perfectly legitimate of you to knock me out." And then we're done.
Right. No, that would be the ideal thing.
Right.
Right.
So if there's a remaining dispute about it, or let's say, his girlfriend's there or something and she's not happy about it, hopefully she wouldn't perjure herself before adjudication, but we would have to.
Right, but that's what I'm saying is like, you're using the word adjudication. There's presumably an adjudicator, but who's that going to be? So Doug and Greg. Let's say you knock out Doug. He's missing teeth because you got a heck of a right cross or whatever punch you throw, and he gets up and he doesn't get it. It still hasn't registered. I marched myself onto Greg's property. I threatened him. He beat me to the punch, quite literally. And I'm missing teeth, and I think he has assaulted my person unlawfully or unethically, and I want to sue him or seek, payment for my dental work that I'm going to receive from the free market. Okay, who decides? Who decides whether you acted rightly or not?
Well, anybody that Doug and I can agree on can serve as an arbiter. So, let's say we can't agree, right? So, we could come to you and you could say, "That's not my job." Right. So we'd have to find somebody. But let's say we can't agree on anybody. We can do this. I select someone that I trust. He selects someone that he trusts. And then those two people agree on someone. Mm-hmm. So in other words, now it's quite possible that we never come to agreement. We can't select anybody to arbitrate our dispute. And, if more people get involved, I guess that increases the incentive for other people to bring a dispute resolution about. But if it's just me and him, we're the only concerned people in the dispute. It's not involving anyone else. No one else is going to make it happen. If we're going to settle the dispute, we have to do it.
So the judge in this case is democratically elected by just the two of you involved, essentially.
That's right. Yep. Or our actual agents, right? Right. People that we select can select an arbiter, and that's the way it has to be done. And this isn't a miracle. This doesn't require people to be less than corrupt human beings to do. you know,
There's
in
still
places.
there's still flaws in this system. We're certainly not
Yeah.
advocating. That's what I explain to people is, we're not advocating for, we're not telling you that there's a perfect system out there. As Reformed people, we're certainly not arguing that fallen people are capable this side of eternity of executing perfection. Um, but I mean, there's just, I was just hearing somebody tell me last night about a court case that they were involved in for many years in our current system, and it's far from perfect. I mean, thousands of dollars spent on attorneys to get really nowhere in the course of a decade.
Yep.
Um,
And there's plenty of historical examples. So if anyone's curious, it shouldn't be any trouble finding it, whether it be the Not So Wild Wild West book or several others. Legal systems different than our own is another title, something along those lines. Plenty of examples that this has been done in history over and over and over again, apart from the state. People have resolved their disputes peacefully through adjudication or arbitration processes. And it happens. Why? Because continuing a dispute in some ways that fosters more aggression is very costly.
right.
So it's simply in people's interest to end such disputes. I mean, even the Hatfields and the McCoys eventually stopped fighting, not because they were necessarily good Christians.
I was ironically just thinking of the
Yeah, the classic
that's
blood feud,
classic
right? Yeah.
example. Yeah.
Now, there's one more thing I wanted to say on this section was that we go on to specify that it's a moral, right, in terms of murder and theft, prohibited in God's moral law, but also specifically a civil justicial norm. And one of the references that we've already mentioned has to do with the Bible's affirmation of the law of proportionate retribution, or as it's known in Latin, lex talionis, the law of
Right.
retaliation. So we
So
have the principle, but then
right.
like
So in the
how we
kidnapping
do it.
situation, if someone kidnapped my kid, I
Mm-hmm.
report to the police. Right. This is in our current society. Launch an investigation. If they find out where my kids are, they go with guns, with force, legally approved force to get them back. Right. So how does that happen in the RAR, right? How do we do that here in this alternative society where we don't have the same structure that we do now? How
Yeah.
does somebody get their kids back?
Well, in a way, there are still people available if you were not able to do that yourself, spend the time and resource, or if you didn't have those skills to deal with the kidnappers, assuming they're kidnapping your kids not just to murder them or something, but to get a ransom or whatever it is. In any case, whatever the situation is, people would also be providing that service. The difference is that it wouldn't be relying on the malformations of the market and the disincentives built in to monopoly government that cause them to do a bad job and make it very expensive for everyone.